welcome back to my channel and to another 5 Year French chat. I am very excited to share this one, but I wanted to pop at the beginning of the video first to tell you that there was a bit of a technical blip. So for some reason my video wasn't working and I'm not recorded in the Zoom chat, but you can hear my voice, and so I'm just gonna put a picture of me whenever I'm talking so that it's not confusing. But that's all I wanted to say. I promise next time I'll figure out the technical stuff. So yeah, without much further ado, here is this really interesting conversation I had with Sewrena about wearing vintage, making vintage, and just vintage in general when it comes to fashion.
So I'm very excited today to talk with my friend Sewrena, who is a great inspiration for me and for a lot of people, I think.
Oh,
And she's joining me today. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks. Thanks for having me.
So I wanted to chat with you today because, like I said, I think you're such an inspiration for a lot of us who want to dress vintage. And I don't know, I'm a little curious and I have questions that I think a lot of people will also have. So do you mind like telling a little bit about yourself, just for those who don't know you?
Yeah. Well, my name is Sewrena, and online I go by Sewrena. So I just added like the SEW because it sounds like my name. But I am a pretty basic person. I'm really crafty. I like to create in my spare time, which I don't usually have a whole lot of. I'm a mom, a wife, but really a homebody who just likes to stay busy, if that makes sense. Like I like to be a busy person. So crafting really fills that void whenever I'm like having to spend a lot of time at home. So I just like to create.
And
I don't get out a whole lot because of like the pandemic, but then also because just like I'm full-time mom, like I have kids all the time. So it's just like I needed to find something that I feel free, like it's freeing, but like I'm always home and available if someone needs me.
And how did you decide to get into vintage? Like I remember you told me once that it was like about 6 years ago-ish, because it's also when
I
started.
That's when I first started dressing vintage. But like after getting this like a question a lot, it really had me thinking like I've always liked vintage, but where did it really start and like why? Like why? No one else dresses vintage around me. And I think it wasn't until like I started like watching TV or cartoons with my kids, like from my past, that it started to click. I'm just like, how could I not like vintage? Every cartoon I watched as a child was like vintage inspired. Like I like the Jetsons, Roly Poly Oly. I don't know if you've seen that show, but like they're so mod in that show. And then like Scooby Doo. And I'm just like, I didn't watch anything that wasn't vintage or retro inspired. So it's like, how could I not have? And it wasn't until recently that like my kids are watching shows that I watched, and I'm just like, this is completely vintage inspired all the way through. So it wasn't until 6 years that I started dressing vintage, but like I've always liked it.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And it's kind of like the same to me. Like it always kind of caught my eye, but it never occurred to me like, oh, I can dress that way. Like, you know, it like,
yeah.
Yeah.
But it just seems so normal. And like, I pretty much was conditioned, like even my family, they're just like, why do you dress like this? And I'm like, did you see the shows you let me watch? Like,
right. Oh, wow. I never thought of it as cartoons. I mean, I feel like for me, it was just like everywhere. Like it caught my eye. But I even remember when I was in maybe like 3rd, 4th grade, we had like a grease, you know, like we did like a grease dance, and we like, you know, those really shiny skirts, like with the poodle.
Yeah.
And at the time, obviously that's like not actually vintage, but it's like inspired.
Yeah, well, I mean, it kind of was if you really think about it, because Grease came out in the 70s, and it was like 70s does 50s. So it was just like, it was still vintage, but like just not accurate, because like they had a lot of influences for their time in the movie. But like I also loved Grease. So it's just like it developed from cartoons to like Grease, and then like a couple of years later, I'm dressing vintage.
So when you started, did you buy clothes or did you start just making them from the beginning?
I started making them from the beginning. So I didn't make full transition until I taught myself how to sew. So I started making modern clothes because like those were the patterns that were available. Like you could just go to the store and get them for 99 cents whenever like, you know, simplicity patterns go on sale. And then I started collecting like the vintage reproduction patterns. And then after that, I just went and got straight true vintage patterns. So it kind of like snowballed. Like as I got better at sewing, then I was like, well, I can wear whatever I want. Like learning to sew made me feel like I had the capability of doing whatever I wanted. So I never bought vintage because one, the market around me wasn't very good for it. And then just finding my size was an issue too. So I just never had the opportunity to dress vintage by like purchasing.
I mean, that's amazing because I mean, I assume from what I've seen that you dress every day, you dress vintage. So like your whole closet by now is probably.
I do.
Amazing. How long did it take you to get to that point?
To transition?
Yeah.
I had a couple hiccups, like having another baby and stuff like that. So it took longer, but it took me about 1.5 to 2 years of just having enough clothes in my wardrobe. And then this year will probably be the last year that I have anything modern really in my wardrobe. And it also helped that prior to dressing vintage, I did not really buy clothes after high school. So like, it's not like I'm just throwing away wardrobe that like, you know, all of my clothes are super, super old. Because I've had the pleasure of not like my body never really shifted or changed until I had kids. So it's like I am just now getting rid of things that probably should have been gone a long time ago. And so, yeah, so I just transitioned from like wearing clothes because I've always just worn clothes that I liked. So I didn't really have to keep swapping wardrobes when new things came in fashion. So I just had a lot of jeans and a lot of t-shirts. And so I'm slowly getting out of that. And I pretty much gotten rid of like most of it, but like I could literally everything I do have, I can pull pictures from like high school Sewrena wearing it. Like I have a lot of just old stuff or like old new stuff. I don't know, but yeah, I don't have a lot of like stuff that I bought as an adult as modern clothes. It's all just stuff that needed to go.
Yeah, because that can be a problem. Like I can see that to me. Like I have already a closet full of some of clothes that are old, but like I feel bad getting rid of them because I
don't know if I would have done that if I had like clothes that were recently bought, but like I pretty much bought everything. They're really old, old in good condition because I take good care of my things, but like just things that it was time, you know, my body has grown, it's changed, it's time, it's okay to let them go.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I mean, going back to like how your process is and when you decide to make something new, what do you do? Like did you find a pattern and they start there? Like what's your process usually?
So first I get like an idea or a thought, and then I try and search for like a pattern that will help me get that. So I take inspirations from like the most random things. Like you know, I like to do a lot of themed dressing sometimes. And like usually that just comes from like something so random. Like, I don't know, maybe I had a good day at the ice cream shop. And so I'm like, oh my God, I really need to make something that embodies this feeling, right? So then I'm like, okay, what can I do? What can I wear that's going to capture this in a vintage outfit? And so then I started searching through the patterns I already have, or maybe just like looking through patterns that like online or something like that. So usually it comes from inspiration. It's rare that I like just mentally think, oh, I need to make a dress and it needs to look like this. I'm usually just inspired by like random things. And then I'm just like, that would be really cute in an outfit. Maybe it's a dish. And I'm like, that'd be really cute if that was a dress. So, and then I try and build it from there. So that's usually what I do. I do like a sketching planning phase, but that's usually so I don't forget ideas. So like if I already have an idea in my head, but it's like dead summer and it's for winter, well, I don't necessarily want to make that right now. Or if I don't have like the materials to make it right now, then that's when I'll go in and write it down so I don't forget it. But for the most part, I just make what I think, you know.
Oh wow, that's interesting. I feel like I sometimes do that too. Like I see someone wearing something and I'm like, ooh, I want to do something like that. Or I see a picture of someone in the past wearing something, but I never thought of like, oh, just a dish or whatever you find around and it inspires you. How many patterns do you have? Do you know?
I have a lot. Like I have at least 400 patterns.
Whoa.
But I didn't buy them all. It's like my house has become like the home for unwanted patterns. Like people will be like, oh, so-and-so died, or I don't sew, or this, that, and the other. Like, do you want them, or they're going to go in the trash? Or do you want them, or they're going to go to Goodwill? And I'm just like, sure, why not? My home has pretty much become like the home of like unwanted patterns. And I'm just like, okay, I'll take them. As long as they're like in my size. Like at first I would just take all of them, but obviously can't sew everything that's not my size. So what I try and do is only request that I get patterns that are within my size range and the areas I dress. But if someone is just gonna like dump them or whatever, I'll take patterns that are not in my size and then I'll just give them to other people I know that are that size. Or if I have like a really close friend, I will keep their sizes so I can make them gifts. But I try and like slow down how much I take and then make sure that I can just rehome them, right? Because like I'm fortunate to have people want to send me them. So I just try to share that to other people. So if I know you wear like a size 14, 16 in vintage patterns, then I will like collect as many as I can and then ship a box to someone else.
Oh, that's amazing. Because like in the end, you don't want them to go to the garbage, right? You want them.
No, I don't.
Yeah, no, I get it. And you also sew for your kids. Do you ever get patterns for your kids gifted?
All of my kids' patterns were gifted. Because they're one size patterns, right? So for kids, I feel like that can be a waste of money because like in 6 months, they're not going to wear that size anymore. Mm-hmm. So I refuse to buy one size patterns for my kids. I usually get like PDF patterns that are vintage inspired, and then I turn them into what I want them to look like. But all of their true vintage patterns, for the most part, have been gifted to me, which they have a ton of patterns. Like they have over 100 patterns that people just send me. Like, I don't have kids, but I saw this at the thrift store, so here. So I'm cool. And like kids patterns surprisingly cost a lot more money, especially boys kids patterns.
Is it like, because they're rare or?
I don't know if they got used up a lot. Like I have no idea, but I think the boys kids patterns are probably rare because I can find dresses all day long, but finding a suit or right now I'm looking for swimwear for my son. Finding those types of things seems to be like really rare. And when you do find it, people want like a whole $20 for a pattern for a child. And I'm just like, no, I'm not spending $20 for a one size pattern. That's crazy.
Wow. So if anyone has boy patterns for swimsuit, you can send them to Sewrena because wow, I would not have imagined that. And I feel like, I mean, I've tried to look for patterns for my husband, for example, and I also find like those are really hard, right?
Yeah. Those are, yeah. I don't have true vintage patterns for my husband. I try and find like a modern equivalent, and then I like make the changes that I feel like might be necessary to make his look vintage. But I've also found that like because my husband, he's plus size and tall. So even if I do find his size, they're only like mediums and larges, which are kind of small by modern standards, but men don't have all those darts and bust darts. And so it's really easy to grade their patterns up.
Oh, interesting.
Especially if you have a modern, like kind of equivalent, because you can like lay over the top and see like, what are the differences in how, because I'm not a professional by any means, but I've been able to get like a vintage dress shirt and like grade it up based off of like a modern pattern that I already have for him that fits. I just like lay it over the top and see what changes needs to be made. So, and men's patterns, they pretty much stay the same. Like they wear shirts, they wear pants, like that's it. So I feel like if you get a couple of really good ones and you grade them, then you don't really have to do a whole lot more. Because I mean, I'm not a tailor. I'm not making him blazers and suits and stuff.
That's what I was gonna say. It does get harder when you're like, you have to do tailoring basically for men.
Yeah.
Yeah. And whereas a dress is so much easier to do it.
Yeah, that's why I started making suits too, is because I want to make him suits. So it's like if I can figure out the tailoring for like my size, then once I figure out grading and stuff, then I can make him like suit jackets and things like that. But like I kind of got lost in the sauce and never actually made him a suit and made myself like 10.
I'm sure eventually he'll get it.
Yeah, I was like, wait, there's a purpose. There's a reason I learned how to do this.
Wow, you have 10 suits. Have you ever made your own pattern or you're not there yet? I feel like that's too hard.
I actually did when I first started sewing.
Oh, wow. What did you make?
When I had free time, like I'm not saying these patterns were great, but I did make things that I 100% made for myself. But like once I had kids and I had to decide, like, do you want to tweak a pattern and you really have I barely have time, right? Like in 5 minutes, do I want to be just now making a sleeve and then not actually make my outfit for another, I don't know, 4 weeks because I don't have any time? Or do I want to just stop trying to reinvent the wheel and use what already exists? And so that's what, for time's sake is why I use so much patterns. But then also, like I said, like I don't need to reinvent the wheel, it already exists, right? I'm not making a living off of pattern making but my hobby at all. So it's not necessary for me right now.
Yeah.
So I just don't. I think grading is more important for me. Grading and pattern alterations is more important for me right now because I have a ton of patterns. There's like no reason for me to make any.
Yeah, you're right. Why do we invent the wheel? And then you can just be more creative about like the colors you use or the fabric.
Mm-hmm. Like that's where I put all of my creativity is into the design like aspect of the garments because like I just don't really have like I can think about how I want an outfit to look all day, but like I don't have that same amount of time for drafting.
And if I may ask, because I'm curious, where do you source your materials usually?
Everywhere. I'm a really thrifty seamstress. Like this is quilting cotton from Walmart.
Wow.
The skirt that I'm wearing, it's a wool skirt, but it's a remnant from it's from a huge fabric store in Atlanta. It's called Fine Fabrics, but they do really big remnants. So I think this was 2 yards and it was like $10, but it's wool.
Wow.
so yeah. So I for a really long time, I never owned like brand new cuts of wool. I would only get remnants from that store. So I'd spend $10 for the wool and then I'd have to be very strategic about what I made with it because like I bought it before I paired it with a pattern. So pretty much Walmart, like anywhere I go, especially during the pandemic, I try and cut down how much places that I'm going at once. So like while Walmart is probably not the best store on the planet, if I can grocery shop, get fabric, do all of these things and lessen how many times I have to go out or even take my kids out, that's what I'm going to choose to do. So that's what I do for the most part, just go everywhere. I'll use vintage sheets if I want to have vintage fabric. I don't really like modern sheets. I tried to do that once and it was kind of a mess because there's a lot of like polyester in it and it was like shredding. It was like dunking on my machine. It was bad. What else do I use? For the kids, sometimes I'll like repurpose my husband's like shirts and stuff because I can always make like a onesie or a new dress shirt, things like that. What else do I use? Vintage tablecloths if they're stained because you can like cut around the stains and stuff. I try not to use materials like, for instance, if I use a sheet, it's because there's like holes and stains so I can cut around it. But if it's still usable as a sheet, then I'm not gonna, cut that up. So yeah, curtains. If I've been gifted curtains, but there's only like one side, but I have like 20 windows in my house, then I'll use the curtain for something else.
That's awesome. I haven't venture out of like outside of fabric stores because I'm like, I don't know where. It's so overwhelming, especially in a big city. I feel like there's way too many options.
Yeah, it is. That big fabric store used to stress me out because there's so much to choose from. And then because I don't usually have a plan, like I see all of these things and my brain is just like, slow down, pick something. So yeah, I think working out of just what you have available makes life a little bit easier. And I'm trying to get into a little bit more like fabric manipulation, like learning how to smock and quilt. So you can like make more out of like the simple things that you have and kind of like, because I like to take things that are relatively affordable and make them look more expensive and more luxurious, right? So like you make up in skill what you lack in money. So that's what I try and do.
I almost feel like when you have limitations, that when you get more creative, because
yeah,
you have to work within what you have, and so you have to figure out ways to do it.
Yeah.
What's your favorite project, or do you have a favorite project so far?
I don't have a favorite project. I think my quilted house coat was probably my favorite project just because that is the longest project and I learned so much within that project. And also it was a project that I wouldn't have been able to do if it weren't for like the people who supported me. Like I literally, I started selling merch. And from those proceeds, I was like, I really want to do something that I would never be able to do before. So that paid for all of my materials. So it's like special because the materials came from people who supported me. And then also like, I just put my heart and soul into that coat.
Yeah, when you mentioned quilting, I thought about that one.
Yeah, I learned how to quilt specifically for that project. Like I bought a book. I looked up a lot of techniques and then it just boiled down to like, you have to just give it a try. There's also so much reading you can do until you actually just try it.
Yeah. And also you also collect the machine. So I love that you try to like match the machine to the pattern. That's really fun.
Yeah. I mean, even that wasn't something that I planned on doing. Like I started out with one vintage machine, and then like I said, people see vintage machines and they're like, hey, you have a vintage machine, do you want another one? So it kind of like grew that way. But then when I like realized the value of them, like I've seen people like just throwing them away, and for what though, like they still work really well. Like the machine's like 70 plus years old and they're still running really, really well. So I was just like, well, they could be in the trash, or I can kind of like keep the history of them alive. Like Kenmore, Sears is no longer a thing. They're not producing Kenmore sewing machines, right? I have little pieces of history here. So I just keep them running. And I started doing like pairing them with vintage patterns, because vintage sewing machines or machines in general work best when they're actually working instead of like sitting there. So it's just like, it gives me a reason to swap them out regularly, you know? So I don't just sit there at one machine and then they continue to kind of rot in my care. So it's just like, if I give them a purpose and a reason to swap them, then I'll do that.
That's great. Yeah, because you're keeping them in business, you're keeping them running.
Yeah.
Do you even maintenance yourself, or how do you work that out?
My husband just does the maintenance, like the general oiling and stuff I can do. I mean, I guess I can service them too, because they were made to be serviced by the user. In the manuals, they'll tell you how to take care of your machine and troubleshoot it. So he will do like the full on opening it up and doing all of that, which does not have to happen, but maybe once a year to keep it in routine maintenance. But then other than like just dropping oil in it and keep doing all that stuff, I do that myself.
Awesome. Yeah, I gotta learn to do that too. Yeah, I was gonna ask you what's the favorite thing you've learned from making vintage clothes, but I feel like you've already said a lot about it. But is there anything else you want to add? Maybe something that's not related to sewing that you've learned from making your own clothes?
I guess I mean, I've always appreciated my things, because we've never been like, I come from humble beginnings. Like my family migrated here, so everything was used until it couldn't be used anyway. But I guess I like appreciate things even more, because I like, you don't know until you're the one, you know, doing it. Maybe that's a bad thing, because I really latch on to things. Like I said, I had clothes from high school, so now I'm really not letting go of stuff if I'm the one who makes it, right? But I guess I just really learned to like really appreciate things and understand like the working care that goes into them. Because even though I appreciate my stuff, I do think maybe I was a little bit hard on stuff. Like I used to wash my clothes a lot. Like if I even breathe on a shirt, it's going in the laundry. And like now I'm just like, no, maybe I don't need to wash it that much. Or like wearing slips and stuff to protect your clothes, so that way you can go a little longer without washes. And like hang drying, it kind of like took me back to my roots, because before my family moved here, everything was like hanging it to dry, and you know, things lasted longer. And I think now that I'm making my own clothes, I've kind of reverted back to doing that. Like I'm not necessarily gonna throw everything in the dryer anymore. So I think just sewing in general has just helped me to like really slow down and like kind of bring me back to my roots. Like I grew up with my family doing certain things to preserve the things that they have. And then as I got older, I was just like, everything go in the washing machine, everything go in the dryer, everything can go, you know, like the fastest way to get it done is the way it's going to get done. And like, I've kind of slowly been going back to like that old way of doing things that I grew up doing.
And I mean, probably not on purpose, but you end up doing the way that it was done for the clothes, like back in the day, like originally.
Yeah. Because I don't want to like have to replace anything. I mean, I do sew a lot, but like I still value my things.
Yeah, but like for example, you mentioned like wearing slips, like that's what people did. Like
yeah.
So you're even more like historically accurate, but not on purpose. You know?
No, yeah, because at first I wasn't wearing slips. I wasn't doing any of that because I just wanted like the outer shell to look vintage. I didn't care about the insides. But then once you realize that everything kind of had a purpose, then it's just like, well, you know, do it, right? Like your slip helps your garments move a certain kind of way. Like if you make things and you don't want wrinkles, then, you know, like you're sitting a different kind of way, like things change when you want, and then you realize, hey, like they did these things for a reason, right? They didn't like wrinkles either, or they liked when their clothes were easy to come on and off, like, you know, so, and then you kind of just slowly revert back to those, not intentionally doing it, at least not for me. I don't intentionally want to live a vintage lifestyle. It kind of just makes sense.
Yeah, I love the, you know, it's like the vintage style but not vintage values. You don't, you know, I hate when people ask like, do you want to go back to, would you want to go back in time? It's like, no, I want to live in the present. I just want to wear what they wore because I can, you know.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And you get to time hop. Like, why would you want to live in a time where like maybe like if I lived in the 40s, and the 60s didn't happen yet, then I can't wear that cute stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
Yeah.
so I'm just like, I like time hopping. I like switching it up. Sometimes I like mixing things. And it's just like, sometimes if you were to be so strict, then you really don't leave room for creativity or personal style. You take all of that out and you're just following this narrative, which is boring.
Yeah, I agree. You can mix styles. Today you can wear 50s, tomorrow you can wear 60s, and then 40s.
Yeah. And I love that. Like, you go the whole week dressing some way, some other kind of way. And I like that.
How does your family like the style? Do they embrace it? I feel like they do. Or at least
My immediate family, like my kids, it's all they know. Like my daughter, she thinks like the epitome of like beauty is wearing like a full skirted dress and like the puffy whatever. Like, she's 1000% in. She knows if she wears her dress, if she wants to wear her petticoat underneath it, she like knows that her dress is incomplete unless her petticoat's underneath it. And she'll be like, oh, I want to wear my skirt. And so I had to put it on there. And my husband, he really loves it, which was quite shocking. Like, he wasn't so into my sewing when I was making modern clothes. But then when I switched to vintage clothes, he was just like, oh, do you need more fabric? So he really likes it. He became way more supportive. And he's always been cheering me on when I was learning how to sew, but he got more involved whenever I switched to vintage. Now, like my extended family, they think I'm weird. They have accepted it for sure, but they're just like, but why?
so
Like,
funny.
why do you do this? And I'm just like, look, I don't know. I just like it.
Yeah, that's funny. I mean, all my family has said is like the hairstyles that was when I had longer hair and I would like curl it. They were like, why? Anyway, and I mean, I feel like we got a lot of interesting stuff. Like I just love getting to know you more and getting to know how you got into it and how, like, you know, you just decided to do it and then just did it. That is so inspiring to me.
Yeah.
What would you tell someone who wants to start but doesn't know where, or like doesn't know how to sew?
Mm-hmm. So for everyone, I would start with using things that's already in your closet. A lot of modern clothes is still vintage inspired to some extent, even if it doesn't look vintage. Like, shirtwaist dresses are as old as forever, but you can still go to Old Navy and get a shirtwaist dress. Mm-hmm. Like, you can go anywhere and get one of those, like brand new, just released this season. Cardigans have never gone out of style. They've always been in style. So maybe you'll like find like wear it in a vintage way, tuck it in, put a belt over the top, wear a A-line or a full skirt, button down skirts, like just wear what you already have and dress it up as best you can. I find that accessorizing can make modern things look vintage. Like if you add a brooch to any blouse, then like no one's putting brooches on blouses. That's going to age it. Your hairstyle, there's a lot of things, like try and do as much as you can without having to spend a whole lot of money, because when you're first starting out, you don't even know what decade you really want to dress in. Like, I think when I first started, 50s was it. Like, that's it. I didn't want to dress from the 40s, 60s or anything else. It had to be 50s, whatever, right? And then the more you get into it, then you're just like, oh, but let me try that. You try it, then you like it. So it's just like try and get as much trying in without like costing you too much money, like just giving it a try. And then like slowly, like as you start to, once you figure out what you truly like, then start investing in what you like. But there's so much inspired clothing that you can, you know, make it work now. And you don't have to be all or nothing. I think some people think that you have to be all or nothing, but like you can like vintage and live in a modern house, or you can do whatever you want, because that's like the beauty of living now. You can do what you want.
Yeah, exactly. And I would say maybe research, but not, you know, when people hear research, I feel like they think like look at books, but I feel like just watch movies, watch old movies, watch how they dress.
Yeah, and patterns. Even if you don't sew, like that's where I learned to style my clothing. The pattern art. So you could just go through tons of pattern art for free on Etsy and like eBay. And like that's where I learned to accessorize, like, okay, because I don't wear vintage or vintage inspired shoes. Those are still 100% modern. So I'm just like, what kind of shoes existed today that existed then? Pumps, like round hood pumps, certain kinds of sandals, things like that. Like, what can you get today that you can just run to Walmart and get, that you can still, you know? And some people, when they do like research, they get like a one-track mind. Like, people only wore their hair this way, or they only did this. But like patterns, there's so much variety. You'll be like, yeah, well, a lot of people had ear length hair, but there were some people who didn't. They had longer hair, right? And so like, or hem lengths. I've had people critique my hem lengths before. They're like, that's too long for the 60s. And I'm like, but I followed a pattern. So
Wow.
like you really, I mean, there's no one way of doing things. So if you can get like sources from like magazines, magazine covers, patterns, like just get a variety, because there is a lot of variety. And especially if you're dressing from a decade, like what you do at the beginning of the decade may not be what you did at the end of the decade. And then you have to think about personal style. Not everybody had money to stay up with trends. So maybe there was someone in the 50s who still was dressing from the 40s because they couldn't afford to. Or maybe they just liked how they dressed, so they didn't want to move on with trends. Like there's all different, it takes all types.
Yeah. And I feel like people have like a very specific, like they think of the 50s, if they think a certain clothing, a certain style, and there's like so much more, right?
Yeah. And I was one of those people. I mean, I didn't critique others, but that's how I like that. Those were the expectations I put on myself. So it's like, if I do 50s, I have to dress this way and this way only. And then as I like got in there, I'm just like, oh, this pattern says it's 50s too. You can actually wear this too. And then you kind of just tailor your style to your lifestyle. Like right now, my clothing matches my lifestyle. I try and use materials that are easy to launder because I have 2 toddlers. So, you know, I can't have dry clean only everything. But like, if you don't have children and you don't have a messy lifestyle, why not? You know, so tailor your style to your actual lifestyle.
Or I remember I asked you once, like, what do you wear? Like, what can I wear instead of leggings and a t-shirt, like when I'm like at home? And even there, like you can wear a house coat, or you can wear like even what you're wearing, like it's so simple, but you don't look modern, you know?
Right. Yeah. And then that's another thing. Like sometimes when I used to dress down, I used to like, I don't know, people equate even now, like loungewear is like being unkept and not caring. And I don't think those two have to be the exact same thing. Like you can have, like my grandpa, his pajamas always match. Like his top matches his bottoms all the time. He's lounging, he's laying around, but like his tops and bottoms matched, right? I wouldn't say that's someone who doesn't care. So I think comfort can still look nice, even if you're not trying to look nice.
Yes. And if your closet's already looking like that, that's what you wear, right?
Yeah, it is. So I really like, especially for my husband, I always make him like matching tops and bottom pajamas. And like, I also need to get out of the mindset that my loungewear had to just be an afterthought. Like my loungewear is a little bit more purposeful while still being just as comfortable as mismatched, like a t-shirt and random whatevers. So that's, yeah, I love loungewear.
yeah, I gotta learn more into that. Well, thank you so much for joining and talking. I think we could talk for another like 2 hours about this, but just to cut it a little bit short, it was super interesting to learn more. And I think a lot of people, if they want to follow you, even if they don't already, which I would be surprised, I will put all the stuff on the description. And thank you.
All right, thank you so much for having me. It was nice talking to you.
Yeah.